You're listening to the Slavic Literature Pod, your shelf help guide to all things Slavic. I'm Cameron Lalana.
And I'm Matt Gerasimovich.
And today we're covering Part 1, Chapter 43 of Vasily Grossman's Life and Fate. And now we've got a character from Stalingrad who has been mentioned once previously in this book, returning Sofia Osipovna Leventon, who is a friend, a doctor, and friend of the Shavoshnikova family, who is, where exactly she is kind of depends. This is an interesting story structure where she's remembering back to being on the train where most of this cattle car, where most of this chapter takes place. But the basic gist of it is Leventon, who is Jewish, is being transported with many other Jewish people to them an unknown destination, although some of them rumor it's a camp. And this is a very tough and interesting depiction of life in the lead up to what will come. So is there anywhere in particular that you would like to start?
Well, sure. There is one thing as I was rereading this that I thought was kind of interesting, grabbed my my attention just as we've been going back through. And this is sort of towards the beginning of the chapter when Sophia is talking about, or, the narrator, I guess, whoever, is describing who is actually on the cattle car. And there's this very long list of everybody who is on there. It's full of workers from different cooperatives, girls at a teacher training college, teachers from a school for trade unionists, a radio technician, an engineer who worked at a canned food factory, a livestock expert, and a girl who worked as a vet. And there are more and more and more people. And this kind of reminded me a little bit of this sort of a couple of scenes in Kuibyshev where we have this sort of, we were kind of talking about, this sort of compression of life under very difficult situations. And this is different because this is much worse than just being forced out of Moscow and having to go live in a communal apartment. This is obviously quite dire situation, but just this sort of, again, there's so much attention that Grossman pays to the variety of people that are all kind of combined in these situations. And it's very interesting because in the Russian Soviet case where you're looking at all these people that are in this I don't know what you want to call it, the city in exile, more or less, and it's this bright, vibrant sort of situation, and the combination of having everybody there, all these different people, gives this sort of vitality to it. And in some ways you can argue it sort of also does. There's sort of these sort of moments of vitality between people on the cattle car. But of course, that they're all going to an extermination camp. And so this is a much sadder and more tragic kind of conclusion that Grossman is bringing them to. And so I just, and on a structural note, I guess that was what that kind of first initial part of this chapter was reminding me of.
That is interesting.
It is interesting, isn't it? I really hadn't picked up on it, and then just as I was going to make through, I was like, it's kind of, that might be there. Might be able to make that comparison.
Yeah, well, I do think it's interesting because that's not something I picked up on, but I noticed that there are other things I'm going through, and I feel like I'm drawing connections out to other moments in the book. And
yeah,
I can't say how much these parallels are meant to be there, or just how much they just exist by the way that Grossman is talking about life. That naturally, the conditions of life can be difficult, but they're difficult and different, but there are certain continuities that you see across all of it. And, that applies here as much as it does anywhere else we've talked about.
Yeah. And there's just a lot of very interesting parts of this, just this sort of realization of where, well, sort of we as the readers know where this is going, but the people on the cattle car don't. And so, we don't know 100% if they do or do not. They're not told where they're going, right? And so Grossman, or the narrator, says what saves people then is the sort of the opium of optimism is what he says. And this is just very interesting. We're going to talk about this more and more, probably in our long episode, but we're getting into a very interesting and difficult string of chapters coming up. This sort of Hannah Arendt's parallel and this sort of really big questions, I think, of the novel. And so this is kind of the beginning of that, I think.
Yeah, I agree. I think too, you can tell that, and this is kind of looking forward a little bit, but too, just the way that these next few chapters will also be structured in relation to each other is not how the rest of the novel has been structured in relation to itself or the other, like these related groups of chapters, which I think will also be interesting in trying to not only
Yeah.
put these questions in front of us, but also start taking a stab at trying to address them.
Yeah. No, the next few are definitely some of the most impactful ones, I think.
Yeah.
Although
Yeah.
I kind of say that about a lot of them because every time I reread them, I think, oh, I love this chapter. And I really love the way this chapter is written.
It's
But
easy to do that with Grossman.
yeah, I'm a sucker for Grossman.
Yeah, every couple of pages, or even more often than that, I read a line that's like, man, I'm going to remember that forever. But it happens every 3 or 4 pages. So,
Yeah, right, right. Well, that's how you
um,
have to do it in chapter a day increments.
right. And speaking of lines that are sticking with us, I think this is a good time to bring in some reader comments for today. We had one Discord user who asks, the line, Sophia learned that there were many things in human beings that were far from human. Is Grossman fully implying that the darkest and most vile parts of ourselves are not human? If so, is this Grossman's way of coping with the horror that can be found in being human? That's a good question. We had some discussion on it in Discord. If you want to read all of that, you can go check it out. But I want to highlight an answer from another Discord user, Dominique, who says, I took it to mean that the animal part still remains in humans, maybe a reference to instinct. I could be wrong, but that's how I interpreted it. It makes sense in the way that it's inescapable, but we want to believe we're better than animals because we can think. And that also allows for more forgiveness for the darker aspects of humans, or at least it seems like it would be less of a judgment and more of an observation, which would fit better with the rest of the chapter. Dominique also goes on to say from there, Chapter 43 is another favorite chapter so far. I've been thinking about the things humans do when they're faced with bad circumstances, and it helps that several books I'm reading touch on the same subject. I love how Grossman always tries to retain a level of understanding and doesn't try to make anyone out to be a hero. He just wants us to see humans in their full complexity. It's wonderful. And yeah, I absolutely agree. Being good or being evil is not a contradictory position, but rather just a relationship of life too, which can be especially difficult when we're talking about victims of great crimes. But I think Grossman has a powerful point to make here that you don't need to be a good person for you a crime to happen against you, especially this magnitude, to be a tragedy.
Yes, it's a very important point. And there's this very great line. The conditions the Jews lived in were terrible, and they were neither saints nor villains. They were human beings. And this is just such a pressing question, I think, even still, uh, in a lot of disciplines and a lot of things that we tend to think about. I agree. Like a lot of times, good or bad or good and evil, it just kind of it can be used to strip humanity away from people. But Grossman really refuses that. Even if someone is bad or evil, it doesn't take away what is the sort of core essence or something really kind of life affirming about his view of humanity.
Yeah, yeah, I completely agree. And it's one that's relevant to all aspects of our lives today in terms of how we treat people and living in the systems that we do, which everyone does around the world that are bigger than us.
We do
You
live in
know,
a system.
we do live in a society, but going to not only the American legal system, but any legal system around the world, talking about these same questions, they're still relevant. This same approach is relevant beyond just. I mean, in this case, talking about the Holocaust, yes, it is absolutely relevant. But I think you can take these same questions to your life or my life or anyone's life listening to this, and start applying these same questions to these large systems, to how people are treated in general. To these same, how do we maintain humanity, our own humanness and human kindness in times where it's easy to not do that.
Yeah, I mean, these questions have been around forever, really. So
Yeah,
Grossman's not presenting a new question, but what he is presenting is a new scale to test the question, and a scale that's not presented in the positive. It's not, oh, how can we do so much good on a greater scale? It is, how could so much evil have ever been perpetrated? And that is still something that I think is very difficult to reconcile with. I think if that doesn't kind of bother you still, then think harder on it.
Yeah. Yeah. I think you mind if we end it there? I think that's a powerful place to leave it.
Yeah, no, that's good. I got so much more to talk about, but I want to save it for our longer episode when we can kind of analyze this string of chapters together.
It will be, I won't say good, it'll be interesting. It'll be tough, but interesting.
It will be.
Yeah, there we go. I think that's a good description. But for now, you'll hear from us again soon.